Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Yeah, my anxiety's pretty high.
We're just kind of hopefully waiting it out for a couple days here.
Hundreds of people are forced from their homes as a massive wildfire burns near Osoyoos. Officials say they're at the mercy of the wind. Also,
check with whoever you've booked accommodation with and see what advice they're giving you.
cancel or carry on? People with vacations booked in areas affected by wildfires wonder what to do. And
it's an economic annihilation of Point Roberts.
We deserve a unique solution to our unique geographic location.
people and businesses in Point Roberts scream for the U.S. president to allow Canadians to come down. But the borders south won't open yet.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Another long, anxious day for people and fire crews across BC. In the South Okanagan, they continue to battle a large blaze burning near Osoyoos. It's forced the evacuation of hundreds more homes. And as Brady Strachan reports, fire officials are now worried about a change in the wind.
I'm here south of Osoyoos in a rural area where the fire is burning just over that ridge behind this vineyard. You can see this big gray plume of smoke billowing up into the sky. At times, open flame can be seen as the fire catches trees on the hillside and starts burning up quite aggressively. The fire is burning on rocky ground and rolling hills with trees covering the slopes. Fire officials say that makes it challenging for crews to get at the fire and for heavy equipment to build containment lines. So they are attacking it from the air with helicopters and water skimmers. Cooler conditions today have limited the growth of the fire, but now officials are concerned about wind in the forecast.
We are somewhat at the mercy of those winds when it comes to direction of spread. Certainly the wind will drive the fire in a specific direction, and we do our best to anticipate those conditions and prepare for them.
People who have been displaced from this fire know just how quickly that can happen. Brian and Chantel Satterfield got the order to leave late Tuesday evening.
Pretty emotional.
Yeah, it's tough. Must be tough leaving.
Yeah. Yeah, my anxiety's pretty high.
They estimate the fire was less than 2 kilometers from their home when they left.
We're all together, that's the main thing. Personal possessions can be replaced, but the way I look at it, we're all together.
This family from Dawson Creek was forced to flee their campsite, a major disruption from their 2-week vacation that had just begun.
We're just kind of hopefully waiting it out for a couple days here and seeing if it gets settled or not.
Meanwhile, fire crews continue to battle the stubborn blaze, burning in the hot, dry conditions with no sign of rain in the forecast.
And our Brady Strachan joins us now from near the fire scene. Brady, first of all, what are emergency officials telling tourists who've been forced to leave their campsites?
Yeah, Dan, there have been multiple campsites that are in the evacuation zone. So officials are telling people if they have been forced to leave those campsites that they should probably go home or leave the area. But they are making some accommodations for them. Princeton, the town of Princeton, has set up a site where people with RVs can come and stay there. They're also opening it up to evacuees who have had to leave their homes and are in their RVs. They're telling them to go down to Princeton where they can have a place to park and camp. Dan?
Brady Strachan joining us near Osoyoos. Thanks very much, Brady. About 280 wildfires are burning across BC. 39 are considered fires of note, meaning they're highly visible or pose a potential threat to public safety. And it's led to new evacuation orders for hundreds more properties today. Isabel Regem joins us now with some of those major evacuations. Isabel.
Dan, more than 500 properties on both sides of Lower Arrow Lake are under evacuation orders in the West Kootenay. Neighboring communities of Fauquier, Needles, and Edgewood are being impacted by 2 separate fires on both sides of the lake. Now, this is footage of the Octopus Creek fire on the east side of Arrow Lake. It's estimated to be about 4,200 hectares. On the other side of the lake, This is the Michaud Creek fire. It's about 2,700 hectares as of this afternoon, and winds have been intensifying the battle for both fires on both sides of the lake. Now, here's a map of the area being impacted by these two fires we are talking about in the West Kootenay region. So right here, the Fauquier neighborhood and community is impacted by the Octopus wildfire. On the other side, we've got Needles, BC. Down here, down south, we have Edgewood. And these communities are impacted by the Michaud wildfire, Michaud Creek wildfire. This lightning, this fire here on the east side was sparked July 11th by lightning. A day before, the Michaud Creek fire was sparked by lightning as well. So you can see the neighborhoods, the two neighboring communities are both impacted by two separate wildfires. There is also a ferry that links both these communities. That ferry has been canceled until at least the next little while. Only emergency personnel can be using that ferry between those two communities, but both sides of the lake are being impacted. Now, we do have word from one community member in Needles, BC, saying they have no intentions of leaving. They are farmers, an ostrich farmers in the Needles area.
So we're confident that if we hunker down around the animals and just keep those grounds wet, that we should be able to hopefully save the animals.
So quite emotional for a lot of people. Officials are warning people to stay vigilant and to be prepared to leave at a moment's notice. Dan?
Isabel Regem joining us tonight. Thanks very much. Another wildfire burning just outside the town of Sicamous has people there on the move and others on edge. The CBC's Tom Popick spent the day there on the lines where a nervous mayor watched that fire hoping for the best.
Yeah, I'm at an inner checkpoint here on the highway. The closest we can get to this fire, you can see it right behind me, burning, smoldering, just off camera, staging area of heavy equipment, firefighters that are battling this blaze. So far, officials say that favorable winds have helped their efforts. Just a kilometer from this wildfire, Sicamous Mayor Terry Rice is watching nervously.
If it all of a sudden jumps this hillside here and heads towards Sicamous, then we'll have to evacuate the whole town.
This wildfire grew to 160 hectares in size overnight. The BC Wildfire Service has deployed 33 personnel on the ground, and from the air, helicopter bucketing and flame retardant drops. Bulldozers were brought in to cut a critical fire guard. A creek and deep gully adds a natural barrier between the fire and town. RCMP marine units are patrolling the lake to stop boaters from interfering with aerial refills. Christina Hutchinson's cabin is near Shuswap Lake.
Terrified. All of our homes are here, like so many memories. It's just so scary, and you just think that like if Sicamous, if it came into the town, it would be devastating for so many people.
The winds haven't picked up yet, but of course the forecast of those gusting winds is the real danger here, like in so many other parts of the province. Some 2,000 residents are on evacuation alert. If this fire jumps those guards, this whole town could be in danger. Tom Popick, CBC News, Sicamous.
As we can see, many regions in our province are bracing for the impact of wildfires. People in 100 Mile House are ready to head out if an evacuation is ordered there.
Our suitcases at home are packed and stuff to load in. We've got our treasures in the trunk of the car here, and we didn't unpack them from 2017.
Yeah. The area is no stranger to wildfire emergencies. In 2017, aggressive wildfires put more than 10,000 people there on alert. This was earlier today. You could see smoky sky, overcast of those tents there. That's where fire personnel are stationed. The province has so far mobilized more than 3,000 firefighters to work around the clock. Teams are set up in areas where lightning could strike. As those wildfires burn, tourists who have booked trips to those areas are wondering whether they ought to cancel. As the CBC's Michelle Gassoub tells us, tourism operators are trying to balance safety and staying open.
The question, to stay or to go? For now, it's still up to you.
If you're going to be traveling to those areas, check with the local providers, check with whoever you've booked accommodation with, and see what advice they're giving you. In the end, people will make their choices. That's entirely up to them.
Some choices are easier than others. If the area you're headed to is under evacuation order, you won't be allowed in. But if the area is under evacuation alert, you should keep in mind that if you are evacuated, emergency services will not be able to help you. Those services are intended for people forced out of their primary residence.
It's hard for me to make that decision. I'll just wait for the authorities to make that one.
Phil Elliott runs the Avalon Inn in Osoyoos. He's seen more and more cancellations, but he's still keen to welcome guests as long as it's safe.
And check in and call me whenever they call me every day. If they have like reservations in the future, to just check in and see how it goes day to day. Because I say, one day it could be clear here and the next day it could be smoky. And it could be other fires popping up.
A slow tourism season is the last thing operators need after a year of bad business thanks to the pandemic.
For those businesses that are affected, we have been there for over a year and a half to make sure that we're stabilizing them, making sure that they have the capital that they need to keep operating, and we'll keep doing that.
Hotels are also a key resource during fire season for housing evacuees and emergency personnel fighting fires on the front line. But the province says there's been no shortage of hotel rooms in the province just yet. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
Meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe joins us now. Joe, lots of people wondering about the wind. You mentioned it as a big factor. What's the latest?
Dan, we are seeing those winds shift now across the southern interior as this mini cold front moves through the region. This is all happening right now. We are seeing the strongest of the wind gusts for the southern interior. I've put them on a map right now so you can see where we are getting those gusts. They will continue to come in from the southwest through the evening hours. So earlier today, yesterday, we were actually seeing those winds with more of a westerly component, and now they have shifted. So for those two big fires we are watching in the Okanagan, those are pushing the flames towards the northeast, and in these two cases away from communities. However, the winds are erratic and we are seeing fires still grow. I was looking at the hot spots from space and I can see those fires advancing now to the northeast. This is a very touch and go situation. Look at those wind gusts. Over 30 kilometers per hour is always a concern. When we get these strong winds, not only are they injecting fresh oxygen into the fires to help them grow in size, they're also pushing the fires, advancing them at quicker speeds that firefighters are having to keep up with, and they're taking those embers and pushing them ahead of the advancing line, so starting spot fires that can then rejoin. That is why winds are so concerning. Notice in the region, we're also getting lightning strikes. I don't think we are going to see a lot in through the Okanagan. Not out of the question, though. You heard earlier that crews are waiting for potentially new strikes in through the Kootenays. Central and northern BC certainly getting a lot of lightning right now, and we are seeing actually some severe storms popping up. Earlier today, we had severe thunderstorm watches and warnings, so keep your eyes on the skies tonight and through the central interior. The one silver lining with this cold front is that temperatures are coming down a little bit. Today and tomorrow, Dan, will be the first days in about 4 weeks now. The temperatures have landed below the 30-degree mark. So I'll talk more about what that can mean in the long range and our forecast coming up.
Okay, thanks very much, Joe.
You're welcome.
As we've seen, firefighters are facing some brutal conditions in BC. Unrelenting wind and tinder dry conditions. And they're expected to stay that way throughout the week. But as Karen Pauls reports, fire crews are battling more than just Mother Nature.
Crews near Nelson, British Columbia are battling these fires, but they're at a big disadvantage. Twice in less than 2 weeks, their firefighting equipment has been stolen.
It's immensely disappointing that, people within our community would go out and do this.
The first theft involved hoses and sprinklers set up to protect a property. In the second, someone broke into this storage trailer, stealing $40,000 worth of pumps, chainsaws, and generators.
It's not like you can easily come by this equipment or just jump on Amazon and go and purchase it.
That's one extreme example of how people are hindering firefighting efforts. Recreational boating is another problem, like this speedboat pulling people on tubes in BC's Caribou region.
There's the fire behind Decca, and yet we have tubers on the lake. When asked, please stay off the lakes.
Just minutes earlier, in that very same spot, a helicopter was picking up water from the lake. It's not the only place this is happening.
The fire started at the base of that mountain.
Last week near Vernon, search and rescue teams were called to get boaters off Kalamalka Lake.
There's a formation of 6 aircraft coming down and picking up water, dumping it, and then just going through. But there's so many people out in the lake getting in the way.
Another issue, aircrafts were grounded after they spotted drones in the air.
And to see all of a sudden everything go away and the fires just pick back up, very, very frustrating.
Anyone caught operating a drone that interferes with fire control could be fined up to $100,000, be jailed for up to 1 year, or both.
Keep out of the way of aircraft, keep out of the way of the crews, let them do their job.
Because Mother Nature is throwing enough at fire crews without humans making it worse. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Vancouver.
BC is reporting 78 new COVID-19 cases today as the rolling average inches up again. But for the second day in a row, thankfully, there are no new deaths. 48 people are in hospital, 16 in intensive care. More than 55% of eligible people 12 and older in BC are now fully vaccinated. Now, Canada will soon reopen its borders to fully vaccinated Americans. Good news for some people in Point Roberts, Washington, who can now be reunited with family and friends in our province. But as Joe Ballard reports, businesses in that small community desperately need both borders open now.
On a regular summer's day, the beaches in this idyllic seaside town would be filled with tourists. Canadians popping across the border for some cheap deals on gas and groceries. But not anymore.
It's the end of economic survival in Point Roberts.
The borders have been closed for 17 months. The economy dropped by 80%. Businesses have closed. Hundreds have left. Point Roberts is isolated from the mainland U.S., sharing its only land border with Tsawwassen. Canadians are its lifeblood, and while Canada's borders will soon open, there's no sign the same will happen in America.
I get it from some of the other crossings, but Point Roberts is, as we all know, very unique, and I've never seen a president sit by and allow the decimation of one of their towns.
The parking lot of the town's only grocery store sits mostly empty.
It has been a roller coaster. We keep getting our hopes up and then we get absolutely just crushed.
And now, American officials have announced the U.S. border will remain closed until at least August 21st.
To let the U.S. citizens go into Canada and not have that reciprocal agreement to let Canadians come down to the U.S. is just absolutely going to take away any business that we have left.
For the past 17 months, Hayden has kept the doors open at her own expense, at a cost of more than $250,000. She doesn't know how much longer she can last.
If they want us to have any chance of digging out of this hole, we really need that exemption.
The residents of Point Roberts are asking for special permission, not for all American borders, just Point Roberts, to bring some life back to the community. Similar requests echoed by Washington Governor Jay Inslee, who recently wrote a letter to the Secretary of State. But the U.S. won't commit to an opening date.
We take this incredibly seriously, but we look and are guided by our own medical experts, and not in a. I wouldn't look at it through a reciprocal intention.
For the residents of Point Roberts, a feeling of abandonment.
We lose this summer. That's 2 summers in a row. That's when we get our 5,000 Canadians in here. They are our economy. If you don't want us, Joe, give us to Delta.
A town in trouble, desperate for help. Joel Ballard, CBC News, Vancouver.
Homicide investigators have a grim scene in Langley tonight after a body was found inside a burned-out truck. Police were called around 7 p.m. last night at 197th Street and 80th after reports of a pickup on fire. Once they put out the blaze, a body was found inside. RCMP say they haven't determined if the incident is linked to any ongoing gang conflicts. And Vancouver police were called to what they describe as a targeted deadly shooting on the downtown east side early yesterday morning. A man was shot and killed inside the London Hotel, a supportive housing project, around 5 a.m. Police are looking for 2 suspects who ran away. death marks Vancouver's 11th homicide of the year. JPod, one of the southern resident killer whale populations, has gone missing. The Orca Behavior Institute in Washington state says it has been more than 100 days since JPod visited inland waters, and this during the peak season for whale watching in the Salish Sea.
100 days without them is really concerning, and they're telling us something is wrong and something has changed.
Shields says while JPod hasn't been in its summer habitat catching Chinook salmon migrating toward the Fraser River, they have been spotted southwest of Vancouver Island. She believes their absence could be linked to dropping salmon runs. A new multi-government reconciliation agreement is returning traditional lands to First Nations near Mission.
With the return of these lands to Lekamel, Matsqui, and Sumas, we open a new chapter in the relationship with our neighbors. Together, we have set the scene for a day in which our children and the children of Mission can grow, laugh, and play together, acknowledging the truths about our history and looking forward to a brighter future.
The agreement is signed by the province, Lekamel, Matsqui, and Sumas First Nations, and the City of Mission. The province will return close to 60 hectares of Crown land to those three First Nations. The land will be used to establish new public parklands, recreation areas, and development. A First Nation in Ontario plans to search for burial sites at a former residential school there. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission found evidence that more than 50 students died at the Mohawk Institute near Brantford.
What we know is that the TRC discovered records of at least 54 death records in the 142 years associated with the school. What we don't know is where those little bodies are buried. We know that throughout the Institute's history, there was an upwards of close to 500 acres that formed the school property. We know that every last acre needs to be searched.
The elected council of the Six Nations of the Grand River is giving residential school survivors $1 million to begin the search, and they want a criminal investigation into the deaths and disappearances of students. There have also been requests for funding and other supports from Ottawa, but the council says there has been no response from the federal government. The Mohawk Institute operated from 1828 until 1970. Over the past two terms of the federal Liberal government, Cabinet Minister Carolyn Bennett has been at the forefront of its reconciliation agenda. But inside her Crown Indigenous Relations Ministerial Office, several former staffers say Indigenous employees were often marginalized and their personal experiences dismissed. The CBC's Jorge Barrera has details.
CBC News spoke with over half a dozen Indigenous and non-Indigenous staffers who worked for the office of Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett. They described working in a toxic office atmosphere where there was clannish behavior by Bennett's tight inner circle. They said that Indigenous staffers were often marginalized and their viewpoints dismissed. They said that complaints about this fell on deaf ears. They said one verbal complaint went to the minister herself, another went to her chief of staff, and 3 verbal complaints went to the Prime Minister's office. These former staffers provided several examples of this type of behavior they viewed as problematic. In one instance, an Indigenous staffer was told by a colleague to, quote, get over her people's traumatic history with Canada. In another instance, during a meeting on murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, an Indigenous staffer was told that their experience of a relative being among the murdered and the missing was not warranted in the discussion. One former Indigenous staffer told CBC News that they felt like a token, marched out for meetings, but when it came to discussions and decisions, their views were not taken seriously. And there's a familiar arc to the stories of these former staffers. They say they entered Bennett's office hopeful that they would become agents of change, but they left disillusioned and jaded. Now, we sent several questions to Minister Bennett's office about these allegations and complaints. Bennett's office sent us an emailed statement from the minister. And the statement reads in part, "It has been imperative to me that the voices of Indigenous members of our team are heard. I am very concerned that any former staff would feel they are not an integral part of our team or that their perspectives were not valued. I am very grateful to the team of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in my office." The statement also said that Bennett's office took human resource issues very seriously. The Prime Minister's office did not provide an on-the-record comment, but a senior government official said that the PMO had no record and no officials in the PMO could recollect any complaints about Bennett's office. Jorge Barrera, CBC News, Gatineau, Quebec.
Overseas now, France is seeing a new surge of COVID Delta variant cases. And the French government is now requiring proof of vaccination before people enter cafes, museums, theaters, and many other public venues. As Tessa Arcilia reports, resistors are comparing France's COVID-19 health pass to a dictatorship.
In France, starting today, if you want to go to the cinema, theater, museum, sporting match, or other cultural venue, you will have to present a health pass. Now, that is a document that will prove vaccination, immunity, or a negative COVID-19 test. No health pass, no entry, and they're taking this very seriously.
So now I try to enter in the Louvre, and too many days went by. So they say that it's not valid, so I have to look for a pharmacy. So I have to pay again.
Starting in August, this health pass will be extended to other everyday public places like cafes, restaurants, shopping centers, or long train journeys. And French President Emmanuel Macron said his government will keep extending the use of this health pass until as many people as possible are vaccinated. Now, France is facing a fourth wave of infections, 18,000 new infections within a 24-hour period. Only around 44% of French people are fully vaccinated. This is not enough to prevent the spread of the virus, and its survey suggests that there is widespread vaccine hesitancy in the country. But Macron's strategy also has its critics. They're calling it a health dictatorship. More than 100,000 people took to the streets last weekend to protest what they said is a taking away of their freedom, their choice. They said that no one can tell them what to do with their bodies or their health, not even a president. Now, the number of protesters, though, paled in comparison to the number of people booking vaccine appointments and taking those shots. After Emmanuel Macron's speech announcing those new rules, 1.7 million people booked their vaccinations within a 24-hour period. And it's not just France that's mandating vaccines to certain extents and in different venues. England, for example, Italy, Greece have put similar rules in place. Canada is thinking about whether some federal employees will be required to get the vaccine. Now, a lot of debate has taken place at the beginning of the pandemic over possible discrimination of mandating vaccines, but it seems this is the direction governments are taking, as opening up depends on how much of the population is vaccinated. Tessa Arcilia, CBC News, London.
The number of COVID-19 cases in Canada, meanwhile, is trending down. And vaccinations are rising, where 80% of those 12 and older have had at least their first dose. So it begs the question, is this the beginning of the end of the pandemic? Christine Birac is here to tell us, not so fast.
With life returning to a new normal across Canada, many are asking, when will this pandemic end? The world remains on a COVID roller coaster, with cases of the Delta variant climbing in several countries. But here at home, infections have dropped dramatically. Down from a peak of nearly 10,000 cases a day in April to about 300.
I'd love to say it will end this year, but I really don't think so. If we're really lucky, we'll have it under control next year.
He adds, in countries with high vaccination rates like Canada, the pandemic will likely be over sooner. Based on past viruses, experts say there are two likely endings.
One is a biological way of it ending, with the virus changing or becoming less aggressive or vanishing, which has happened.
Identified in 2003, SARS was one of the most recent viruses to simply vanish on its own, while smallpox is the only human disease that's ever been eradicated. But this pandemic will likely end differently.
The other is a social ending where the death rate is not in excess of what has been expected, and people just collectively decide that what remains can be lived with or managed.
In other words, as more people become protected from this coronavirus through vaccination or natural infection, the disease will become less severe.
Hopefully we're entering that shift into a kind of endemic mode where we have low levels of COVID, it's around, but it doesn't, because we have so much immunity in the population, we don't threaten the healthcare system.
This coronavirus could be like the flu. Better yet, if the infection remains mild in children and they develop immunity, when they're older, the virus may just cause a cold. However this pandemic ends, experts say vaccines are key.
So why aren't we sharing? Because that for me is the big problem we have right now.
Because even if Canadians exit the pandemic roller coaster this year, a new variant could turn the world upside down. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.
You can always find our news program online at cbc.ca/BC. Our next local news is right here at 7 o'clock on CBC television, right after the Olympic softball match between Canada and the U.S. We'll see you then.